On a freezing Tuesday in Hamburg, thousands of workers gather to witness the birth of a weapon designed to break the world. The steel hull rising before them is not merely a warship, but a 45,000-ton declaration that the peace of Europe is already over. She slides into the Elbe River with a violent splash, baptizing a career that will be defined by speed, majesty, and a singular, devastating failure. The date is February 14, 1939. The atmosphere on the docks of the Blohm & Voss shipyard is electric, charged with a mixture of nationalistic pride and the quiet anxiety of a nation preparing for a fight it knows is coming. The ship is christened Bismarck, named after the Iron Chancellor who unified Germany in the previous century. The ceremony is attended by Adolf Hitler, who watches from the christening platform. To the observers on the shore, the ship represents the resurgence of German industrial might. She is sleek, massive, and terrifyingly modern. But beneath the bunting and the speeches, the Bismarck is a secret violation of international law. The Anglo-German Naval Agreement and the earlier naval treaties limited battleships to 35,000 tons. The German designers, operating under strict orders to build the ultimate fighting machine, have quietly ignored these limits. When fully loaded with fuel, ammunition, and crew, the Bismarck displaces more than 50,000 tons. She is the largest warship ever built by a European power, a leviathan designed to outclass anything the British Royal Navy can put to sea. Her specifications are staggering. She stretches 823 feet from stem to stern. Her main battery consists of 8 15-inch guns arranged in 4 twin turrets named Anton, Bruno, Caesar, and Dora. These guns can hurl a projectile weighing nearly 2,000 pounds over a distance of 20 miles. Her armor belt is 12 inches of hardened steel, designed to shatter enemy shells before they can reach the vitals of the ship. Inside, she is a labyrinth of watertight compartments, a fortress built to be unsinkable. Yet as the fitting-out process begins, the engineers and the newly assigned officers begin to notice that this perfection has a price. The Bismarck is designed for the North Atlantic, a violent ocean of storms and heavy swells. Her bow is relatively low, and her stern is broad. In the simulation tanks and later in the early sea trials, a worrying characteristic emerges. The ship relies heavily on her twin rudders for steering. Most warships can use their propellers, their screws, to turn the ship by running one engine ahead and the other astern. This is a critical redundancy. If the rudders are damaged in battle, a captain can steer the ship by manipulating the speed of the engines. But the Bismarck does not respond well to this maneuver. The placement of her propellers and the hydrodynamics of her stern mean that without the rudders, she is almost impossible to steer. If her steering gear were to jam, the most powerful battleship in the world would become a drifting hulk, unable to dictate its own course. It is a flaw buried deep in the blueprints, a technical detail that seems minor in the calm waters of the Baltic Sea but will become fatal in the open ocean. Captain Ernst Lindemann takes command of the ship in the summer of 1940. He is a career naval officer, a man of rigid discipline and immense technical competence. He is 46 years old, respected by his crew and his superiors. Lindemann understands the gravity of his assignment. He is not just commanding a ship, he is commanding the flagship of the German surface fleet. He spends months drilling the crew. The Bismarck carries more than 2,000 men. They are young, many of them barely out of their teens, drawn from every corner of Germany. They view their assignment as a singular honor. Life on board is a mix of hard labor and technical training. They practice gunnery drills until the loading teams can fire 3 rounds a minute. They practice damage control until they can find every valve and hatch in total darkness. By the spring of 1941, the strategic situation has shifted. The war is raging, Germany has overrun France and dominates the continent, but the war at sea is a different story. Great Britain is an island nation, dependent on the convoys of merchant ships bringing food, fuel, and munitions from North America. If Germany can sever this lifeline, Britain will starve. The German naval strategy, led by Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, is not to seek a decisive battle with the British home fleet. The Royal Navy simply has too many ships. Instead, the strategy is commerce raiding. The plan is to send heavy surface units, battleships, and cruisers into the Atlantic to hunt the merchant convoys. A battleship like the Bismarck in the middle of a convoy is a fox in a henhouse. Her guns can sink a freighter in seconds. The escorting destroyers and corvettes would be helpless to stop her. This is the genesis of Operation Rheinübung. The plan calls for the Bismarck to break out into the Atlantic accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. They are to avoid the British warships, slip through the blockade, and wreak havoc on the supply lines. However, the plan is plagued by delays and bad luck. The original concept involved a larger task force. The battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were supposed to join the Bismarck, creating a squadron that would be unstoppable. But the Scharnhorst is undergoing engine repairs, and the Gneisenau has been damaged by a British torpedo and air raids. The Bismarck's sister ship, the Tirpitz, is still months away from completion. Admiral Günther Lütjens, the fleet commander who will lead the operation from the bridge of the Bismarck, has deep reservations. Lütjens is a tall, austere man who rarely smiles. He is a realist. He argues that it would be better to wait until the Tirpitz is ready or the Scharnhorst is repaired. Sending a single battleship and a cruiser against the entire Royal Navy seems like an unnecessary risk. He worries about the reliability of the new high-pressure steam turbines. He worries about the British radar, which is improving every month. But the pressure from Berlin is immense. The leadership wants a victory. They want to show the world that the German Navy can strike anywhere. The order comes down. The Bismarck will sail. In early May 1941, the ship moves to the port of Gotenhafen, now Gdynia, Poland, on the Baltic coast. The final preparations are made. Fuel bunkers are topped off, although a ruptured hose prevents the full loading of the forward tanks. Another minor detail that will have consequences. The crew writes their last letters home. The mood is serious. They know they are about to attempt a breakout through waters controlled by the enemy. On the morning of May 18, 1941, the lines are cast off. The Bismarck moves away from the pier, her band playing, the crew lining the rails. She is accompanied by the Prinz Eugen, a beautiful modern cruiser that looks remarkably similar to the battleship in profile. As they steam north through the Baltic, the reality of the mission settles in. They are leaving the safety of the inland sea. Their destination is the Denmark Strait, the narrow, ice-choked passage between Iceland and Greenland. It is the back door to the Atlantic. Captain Lindemann addresses the crew over the loudspeaker. He tells them that they are hunting the enemy. He speaks of duty and confidence. But he knows, as Lütjens knows, that secrecy is their only armor. If the British find them before they break out, the hunter will become the hunted. The ship is a masterpiece of engineering. Her optical rangefinders are the best in the world. Huge, stereoscopic eyes that can spot a mast on the horizon 20 miles away. Her radar sets, the FUMO-23, are advanced for their time, though fragile. Her engines are powerful, driving the ship at speeds exceeding 30 knots. But as the Bismarck passes the island of Rügen and heads toward the Kattegat, she is entering a trap of geography. To reach the ocean, she must pass close to Sweden and Norway. These waters are watched. There are fishing boats, neutral merchant ships, and resistance watchers on the coast. On May 20th, the first crack in their secrecy appears. The German squadron is spotted by the Swedish cruiser Gotland. The Swedes are neutral, but they routinely share intelligence. The report of 2 large German warships heading north makes its way to the British naval attaché in Stockholm. From there, it is flashed to London. The Admiralty in London reacts with controlled alarm. They have been waiting for this. They know the Bismarck is the most dangerous ship afloat. If she gets loose in the Atlantic convoys, the devastation will be incalculable. The hunt begins before the German ships even leave the North Sea. Aboard the Bismarck, the crew is unaware that their cover is blown. They are focused on the routine of the ship. They stand watch, clean the guns, and eat their meals in the mess halls. The ship is a sealed world, vibrating with the power of the turbines. The smell of paint and oil permeates the air. Admiral Lütjens paces the Admiral's bridge. He is a man carrying the weight of a fleet on his shoulders. He has been ordered to be aggressive but also cautious. He must sink merchant ships but avoid battleships. It is a contradictory set of orders. As they reach the coast of Norway, they pull into a fjord near Bergen to top off their fuel tanks. The Prinz Eugen refuels. But for reasons that remain debated by historians, Admiral Lütjens decides not to refuel the Bismarck. Perhaps he wants to save time. Perhaps he thinks he has enough fuel to reach the Atlantic tankers waiting for him. It is a decision that strips the Bismarck of a critical safety margin. She sails on, heading north toward the Arctic Circle, toward the fog and the ice of the Denmark Strait. The weather begins to turn, the sky lowers, gray and heavy with snow. The sea rises, the Bismarck begins to pitch, her bow cutting through the waves, throwing spray over the bridge. This is the weather they wanted. This is the cloak of invisibility. But on May 21st, a British reconnaissance Spitfire flying high over the Norwegian coast snaps a photograph. The photo analyst in England looks at the grain image and sees the unmistakable silhouette of the Bismarck nestled in the fjord. The confirmation is absolute. The Royal Navy mobilizes. The home fleet, anchored at Scapa Flow in Scotland, begins to raise steam. The battlecruiser HMS Hood, the pride of the British fleet, and the brand new battleship HMS Prince of Wales are ordered to intercept. The Bismarck is no longer a rumor. She is a target. As the German ships leave the Norwegian coast and head into the open ocean, the crew feels the shift. The training is over. They are sailing into the gray void of the North Atlantic. Behind them lies the continent they control. Ahead of them lies an ocean controlled by their enemy. The Iron Cathedral is at sea. She is powerful, she is fast, and she is magnificent, but she is also alone. And converging on her position are the collected assets of the greatest naval power on Earth, driven by a single, overriding imperative. The Bismarck must not reach the Atlantic. The stage is set for the collision. In the cold waters between Iceland and Greenland, the two most famous ships in the world are on a collision course. One is old and weary, a symbol of a past empire. The other is new and untested, a symbol of a new order. Only one of them will survive the next 72 hours. The German battleship Bismarck slices through the slate-gray waters of the North Atlantic, a 33-knot predator breaking through the last veil of secrecy. Her departure from Norway on May 18, 1941, was designed to be a phantom mission, a ghost slipping through the Allied blockade. But the Cold War of intelligence and counterintelligence has already declared her a target. The war's initial moves have been made not with gunfire, but with whispers across diplomatic channels and grainy photographs taken from miles above. The Swedish cruiser Gotland had provided the first flicker of confirmation for the British Admiralty. Her report of two large German warships steaming north toward the Denmark Strait, though initially uncertain, was enough to activate the hunt. From Stockholm to London, the information flowed, a vital piece in the vast, invisible web of Allied intelligence. Admiral Lütjens, commanding the German task force from the Bismarck, was not operating in secrecy. He was operating in the open, his every move anticipated. His hope, and the core of his precarious strategy, lay in the weather. The Denmark Strait, the narrow passage between Greenland and Iceland, was notorious for its brutal conditions. Fog banks were common, clinging to the water's surface like shrouds. Storms could blow in with little warning, reducing visibility to yards and turning the sea into a boiling cauldron. In such conditions, the Bismarck's superior optical rangefinders, painstakingly crafted to provide unparalleled clarity, would be useless. Her crew's superior training, their expectation of engaging at ranges they could visually confirm, would count for nothing if they couldn't see the enemy. But the Americans had already introduced an invisible eye into this ancient dance of naval warfare: radar. While the Japanese relied on lookouts scanning the horizon, the Iowa-class battleships and the British ships they would soon encounter were equipped with advanced radar systems. These electronic eyes could pierce the fog, see through the smoke, and detect targets miles beyond the horizon, regardless of weather conditions. The Bismarck and Prince Eugen, despite their size and speed, were not invisible. Their massive steel hulls and powerful engines radiated heat and noise. Their radar, while present, was considered secondary to optical targeting by the German naval doctrine. The Americans, conversely, had embraced electronics. The Iowa's Mark 8 fire control radar was a quantum leap forward, capable of tracking targets at ranges that made optical sighting irrelevant. This radar data fed into the Mark 1A fire control computer, an analog marvel of gears and shafts that calculated firing solutions with lightning speed. The Americans were fighting a war of electronic data. The Germans were still fighting a war of visual confirmation. As the Bismarck and Prince Eugen steamed westward, aiming to break into the Atlantic's vast hunting grounds, they were unknowingly sailing into an intercept course plotted by Admiral Spruance's carrier group. Spruance, understanding the need to neutralize the Bismarck before she could become a major threat, deviated from standard doctrine. Instead of leaving the surface engagement to the cruisers and destroyers, he detached the fastest battleships in the fleet, USS Iowa and USS New Jersey, to form Task Group 50.9, supported by heavy cruisers and destroyers. His intent was clear: to intercept and destroy the German surface raiders with overwhelming force, demonstrating the superiority of American naval power. The Japanese assumption that the Americans would rely solely on aircraft to intercept them was a critical miscalculation. They saw the American carrier groups as the primary threat, but they underestimated the battleships that formed their escort. They believed their speed and maneuverability, combined with the prevailing weather conditions, would allow them to evade direct confrontation with a heavy surface unit. They prepared for a chase, not a trap. On May 23, 1941, the weather over the Denmark Strait turned foul. Fog banks rolled in from the Greenland ice pack, reducing visibility to a few hundred yards. The sea swelled, tossing the ships like toys. The wind howled, carrying snow and spray. The Bismarck, moving at 30 knots, was a dark shape wrestling with the waves. Her hull groaned under the strain. Her crew was tense, knowing they were nearing the open Atlantic, the operational territory of their mission. They did not know that a few miles away, beyond the fog and the storm, another fleet was waiting. This fleet was not relying on sight. Its eyes were electronic, sweeping the water with radar beams that pierced the gloom. The Iowa and her escorts were not guessing the Bismarck's position. They were calculating it. They had locked onto the target's radar signature, its engine noise, its wake. The Bismarck might have felt hidden in the tempest, but to the technology operating against her, she was illuminated. The German doctrine of visual supremacy was about to be rendered irrelevant by an invisible enemy. The trap sprung near dawn. As the Bismarck steamed through a gap in the fog, her silhouette appeared on the radar screens of the American ships. The Iowa, leading the pursuit, adjusted her course. Her 16-inch guns began to train forward, guided by the radar's unerring eye. The range was closing rapidly. The battle that would define the twilight of the battleship was about to begin, not with a visual sighting, but with a ping from a dish spinning in the darkness. The Japanese ships were attempting an escape, a desperate bid to reach the open Atlantic and begin their commerce raiding mission. The Katori, a light cruiser, and the destroyers Maikaze and Nowaki, along with the auxiliary cruiser Akagi Maru, were making for Saipan. They believed that the American battleships, the colossal Iowa and New Jersey, would remain with the carrier screen, prioritizing the protection of the air groups. They gambled that the slower cruisers and destroyers would be left to handle any surface threats. This was a miscalculation born from adherence to older doctrines. Admiral Spruance, commanding the American Carrier Task Force, had made a different decision. He saw the fleeing Japanese ships not as a minor nuisance to be mopped up by escorts, but as a primary target that represented a strategic opportunity. He detached the fast battleships, the Iowa and New Jersey, and the heavy cruisers Minneapolis and New Orleans, along with a destroyer screen and the light carrier Cowpens, forming Task Group 50.9. This striking force was ordered to intercept and destroy the Japanese surface group. Spruance's decision was a gamble that went against the prevailing wisdom of the time. The carrier was king. Battleships, with their massive size and thirst for fuel, were seen as potential liabilities, too slow and too vulnerable to air attack to be deployed offensively in the face of superior Japanese carrier strength. But Spruance understood the psychological and strategic weight of the battleships. Their presence alone could force the enemy to alter their plans. More importantly, he wanted to demonstrate that the U.S. Navy's new fast battleships, capable of 33 knots, could operate alongside the carriers, not merely trail behind them. He wanted to unleash the greyhounds of the sea on a target they could actually catch. The Japanese ships were unaware of the trap being laid for them. Their doctrine emphasized visual contact and medium-range gunnery. They had trained for engagements where the enemy was a silhouette against the sky, where the accuracy of their optics was paramount. They believed that beyond 15 miles, a battleship's guns were little more than a nuisance. They were about to discover that the American ships had eyes that could see through fog, smoke, and darkness. As the Katori and her escorting destroyers cleared the reef of Truk Lagoon, the hope of escape flickered for a moment. The air raid was drawing to a close, the American planes having inflicted devastating damage on the anchored fleet within. But the horizon to the north was suddenly occupied by a new threat. Not the distant specks of aircraft, but the towering superstructures of two American battleships, rising from the waves like vengeful gods. The radar operators aboard the Iowa and New Jersey had already made contact. Their screens painted a clear picture of the fleeing Japanese ships. The blips moved across the green phosphorescence, their course and speed meticulously tracked by the powerful Mark 8 radar systems. This invisible electronic net was far more accurate than any human eye, unaffected by the swirling sea spray or the falling dusk. For the Japanese crews, the first critical contrast was the absence of visual confirmation. They could not see the ships that were targeting them. They could only hear the crackle of their own radio operators reporting radar contacts, and perhaps feel the subtle vibration of their own hull as it tried to evade ghosts. The American fire control system, centered around the Mark 1A analog computer, was continuously processing this data. It was calculating the exact trajectory of the shells, factoring in the pitch and roll of the Iowa, the drift from the wind, and the rotational speed of the Earth. The Bismarck had taught the world about the limitations of optical range finding in the face of electronic detection. Now, the Iowa was demonstrating that radar, coupled with advanced analog computing, could dictate the terms of engagement entirely. The enemy existed on the screen, and that was enough to seal their fate. The chase was on, not towards a visible enemy, but toward a series of blips on a radar scope, a hunt guided by invisible eyes that never slept. In the icy gray twilight of the Denmark Strait, the silence is broken, not by a roar, but by a voice over a telephone. It is the morning of May 24, 1941. The time is 5:35 a.m. On the bridge of the HMS Prince of Wales, a lookout lowers his binoculars and speaks the words that the Royal Navy has been waiting to hear for 3 days. He has spotted the smoke. Two dark shapes are visible against the ice pack to the north, moving fast, hull down on the horizon. The trap has snapped shut. The British squadron, led by Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland aboard the legendary battlecruiser HMS Hood, has successfully intercepted the German breakout. The geometry of the engagement seems perfect. The British have the superior angle, the heavier guns, and the element of surprise. They are approaching the Germans from the dark side of the horizon, while the Bismarck and Prince Eugen are silhouetted against the rising sun. But beneath the surface of this tactical advantage lies a terrifying structural weakness. The HMS Hood is the most famous warship in the world, the physical embodiment of the British Empire. She is massive, fast, and beautiful, a ship that has spent 2 decades touring the globe as a diplomat of steel. Yet to the naval architects who understand her blueprints, she is a glass cannon. She was built during World War I, a fast battlecruiser designed to hunt raiders, not to stand in the line of battle against a modern dreadnought. Her deck armor is dangerously thin. She is vulnerable to plunging fire, shells fired from long range that arc high into the sky and come down almost vertically, bypassing the thick belt armor on the sides to punch through the decks into the magazines. Admiral Holland knows this flaw intimately. He knows that his only chance of survival is to close the range as quickly as possible. If he can get close, the trajectory of the German shells will flatten, striking the Hood's thick side armor rather than her fragile decks. He orders a turn directly toward the enemy. He demands full speed. He's trying to sprint across the danger zone, a maneuver that blinds his own aft turrets but shields his ship's weakness. Across the water, 10 miles away, the atmosphere on the bridge of the Bismarck is one of disciplined tension. The German acoustic sensors have picked up the propeller noise of the approaching ships. The lookouts have spotted the masts. Admiral Lutyens and Captain Lindemann see the 2 British capital ships charging toward them. They do not know it is the Hood. The silhouette of the lead ship looks remarkably similar to a different British vessel. But as the range closes, the identification becomes clear. The mighty Hood is coming for them. At 5:52 a.m., the British open fire. The distance is roughly 26,000 yards, about 15 miles. Orange flashes erupt from the forward turrets of the Hood and the Prince of Wales. The sound of the discharge takes nearly a minute to reach the German ships, a rolling thunder that vibrates through the steel of the Bismarck. But in the stress of the moment, a critical error occurs. The British ships are firing at the wrong target, because the Prince Eugen has a similar silhouette to the Bismarck and is leading the German column. The gunnery officers on the Hood have locked onto the cruiser instead of the battleship. They are pouring 15-inch shells at the smaller ship, leaving the Bismarck undisturbed to calculate her own firing solution. The Prince of Wales realizes the mistake and shifts fire, but for the first few minutes of the engagement, the most powerful German ship is unmolested. On the Bismarck, the gunnery officer, Adalbert Schneider, requests permission to open fire. Admiral Lutyens hesitates. He is under strict orders to avoid engaging enemy warships if possible. His mission is commerce raiding. He wants to turn away. But Captain Lindemann, growing impatient as British shells begin to splash around his ship, reportedly mutters, "I will not let my ship be shot out from under my ass." Permission is granted. The Bismarck's main battery rotates. The 15-inch guns elevate. The German optical rangefinders prove their worth immediately. Unlike the British, who are relying on early temperamental radar sets and visual spotting through spray-lashed lenses, the Germans have clear visibility. Their stereoscopic rangefinders are masterpieces of optics. They lock onto the hood instantly. At 5:55 a.m., the Bismarck fires her first salvo. The duel that follows is short, brutal, and devoid of the romanticism often attributed to naval warfare. It is a contest of ballistics. The British ships are rushing in, their forward guns firing, their bows buried in foam. The German ships are turning broadside, bringing all their guns to bear. The Bismarck's gunnery is terrifyingly precise. Her first salvo lands just forward of the hood. Her second salvo is a straddle, bracketing the British flagship with towering columns of water. The German fire control system has found the range in seconds. The Prince Eugen also scores a hit. An 8-inch shell strikes the hood amidships, igniting a fire in the ready-use ammunition lockers for the anti-aircraft rockets. A bright, distinct fire begins to burn on the boat deck of the hood. It is not a fatal wound, but it acts as a beacon. It illuminates the British ship, giving the German gunners a perfect point of aim in the gray morning light. At 6 o'clock a.m., the engagement enters its final, fatal minute. Admiral Holland, believing he has closed the distance sufficiently to protect his decks, orders a turn to port. He wants to bring his aft turrets to bear, to unleash the full broadside of the hood. As the massive ship begins to swing, presenting her full length to the enemy, the Bismarck fires her fifth salvo. The 4 shells from the Bismarck arch through the sky. They are traveling at supersonic speeds, weighing nearly a ton each. One of them, guided by the laws of probability and physics, finds the geometric weakness of the British battlecruiser. It strikes the hood between the mainmast and the aft funnel. It plunges through the thin steel of the boat deck. It penetrates the armored deck below. It keeps going, deep into the bowels of the ship, until it reaches the 4-inch magazine. The explosion of the 4-inch magazine initiates a chain reaction. The flash travels instantly to the adjacent 15-inch magazine, the main reservoir of cordite propellant for the rear turrets. 100 tons of high explosive detonate simultaneously. To the observers on the Prince of Wales just half a mile away, the sight is incomprehensible. The hood does not just explode, she is erased. A column of flame shoots 1,000 feet into the air, a pillar of fire that looks like a volcanic eruption. The middle of the ship simply disintegrates. The bow and the stern are lifted out of the water by the violence of the blast, breaking the back of the vessel. The forward turret of the hood fires one last defiant shot, the circuits closing even as the ship dies. Then the bow slides backward, the stern rises vertically, the propeller still turning in the air before sliding beneath the waves. It takes less than 3 minutes. At 6:00 a.m., the HMS Hood was the pride of the Royal Navy, a living city of 1,418 men. By 6:03 a.m., she is a cloud of smoke and a patch of oil on the surface of the Denmark Strait. There are only 3 survivors. The suddenness of the catastrophe stuns the combatants on both sides. On the Prince of Wales, the bridge crew is showered with debris and body parts falling from the sky. The ship has to maneuver violently to avoid colliding with the wreckage of her leader. She is now alone, facing the concentrated fire of 2 German ships. She takes multiple hits. Her bridge is smashed, killing most of the officers. Her guns, still suffering from teething troubles, begin to jam. She makes smoke and retreats, limping away into the mist. On the bridge of the Bismarck, there is no cheering. The German officers are silent, awestruck by the total destruction they have wrought. They have slain the giant. They have won the artillery duel, but the victory is not without a cost. During the brief exchange, the Prince of Wales managed to land 3 hits on the Bismarck. 2 of them are minor, striking the upper works, but one is critical. A 14-inch shell struck the Bismarck below the waterline, passing through the forward oil tanks. It did not detonate inside the vitals, but it severed the fuel lines and opened the tanks to the sea. Thousands of tons of fuel oil are now inaccessible to the engines. Worse, the hit has caused a leak. A long, broad trail of oil is streaming behind the Bismarck, painting a black line across the ocean. Admiral Lutyens receives the damage control report. The ship is down by the bow, she has taken on 2,000 tons of water, her top speed is reduced, and critically, she is bleeding fuel. The strategic situation has inverted in the span of an hour. The Bismarck has won the tactical battle. She has sunk the Hood and driven off the Prince of Wales. But she has failed her strategic mission. She can no longer remain at sea to hunt convoys. She does not have the fuel range. The element of surprise is gone. She is damaged, leaking, and leaving a trail that any aircraft can follow. Lutyens makes a decision that will seal the fate of his ship. He cancels the Atlantic raid. He orders the Prince Eugen to detach and continue the mission alone. The Bismarck will turn southeast. She will head for the French coast, for the dry dock at Saint Nazaire, where she can be repaired. It is a decision born of prudence, but it sets the stage for a tragedy. The Bismarck is no longer the hunter. She is the prey. As the German battleship turns away from the scene of the victory, the news of the Hood's destruction reaches London. The shock is profound. It is not just the loss of a ship, it is a blow to the national psyche comparable to the fall of France. The Hood was invincible. If she can die in 3 minutes, what is safe? In the Admiralty bunker, the initial despair turns rapidly to a cold, hard rage. Prime Minister Winston Churchill issues the order that will define the next 3 days of the war. It is not a strategic directive, it is a vendetta. Sink the Bismarck. The order goes out to every ship in the Atlantic. Convoys are stripped of their escorts, battleships are diverted from troop transport duties, aircraft carriers are turned north. The Royal Navy stops fighting a war of blockade and starts fighting a war of revenge. The Bismarck is now the most wanted object on the planet. She is alone in the vastness of the ocean, wounded and leaking. Her crew is elated by their victory, believing they are invincible. They do not yet realize that they have kicked a hornet's nest. They do not know that the sinking of the Hood has guaranteed that they will never see Germany again. The 3-minute war is over. The long hunt has begun. The Bismarck steams south, pushing through the cold swells, while behind her the entire strength of the British Empire begins to converge on her wake. The North Atlantic is a wilderness of water, 1,000,000 square miles of gray swells and shifting fog where a ship, even one as massive as the Bismarck, is nothing more than a speck of dust. Following the destruction of the HMS Hood, the British Admiralty transforms the ocean into a closing net. The order from Winston Churchill, sink the Bismarck, strips the strategic reserve of the Royal Navy. Convoys are abandoned. The battleships Rodney and Ramillies break off from their escort duties. The aircraft carrier Ark Royal steams north from Gibraltar. Every available hull is turned toward the last known position of the German giant. But a net is useless if the fish slips through the mesh. On the evening of May 24th, mere hours after the battle, Admiral Lutyens makes his move. The Bismarck is shadowed by the British cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk, which are using their radar to maintain contact through the mist. They are the eyes of the fleet, guiding the heavy units of the home fleet led by Admiral John Tovey in the battleship King George V toward the kill. Lutyens orders a sudden, violent maneuver. The Bismarck turns hard to starboard, her guns blazing, charging directly at her pursuers. It is a feint, a burst of aggression designed to force the British cruisers to turn away and break radar contact. In the confusion of the brief exchange, the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen slips away to the south. She has been released to conduct commerce raiding alone. The Bismarck is now truly solitary. Then, the Bismarck does something the British do not expect. Instead of continuing south, she executes a massive, looping turn to the west, circling back behind her pursuers. She enters a blind spot in the British radar coverage. On the bridge of the Suffolk, the radar operator watches the green sweep of the screen. The blip that represents the Bismarck, the blip that has been the center of their universe for 2 days, flickers and vanishes. The operator adjusts the gain. He sweeps the sector. Nothing. Contact lost. The report travels up the chain of command like a shockwave. The Bismarck is gone. The most dangerous ship in the world has disappeared into the empty ocean. For the next 31 hours, the British Navy is fighting a ghost. Panic begins to seep into the plotting rooms. Admiral Tovey, steaming hard to intercept, is suddenly blind. He has to guess. Has the Bismarck turned back to Norway? Is she heading for the oil fields of the Caribbean? Is she making a dash for the French coast? Tovey guesses wrong. Based on a misinterpretation of the last known signals, he believes the Bismarck is heading northeast, back toward the gap between Iceland and Scotland. He turns the entire British battle fleet in the wrong direction. Every hour, the distance between the hunter and the prey widens. The British ships are burning precious fuel, straining their engines, racing toward an empty patch of sea. On board the Bismarck, the mood should be one of relief. They have shaken the tail. They are invisible. If they maintain radio silence and hold their course for St. Nazaire, they will reach the safety of the Luftwaffe's air cover in a day. Once under the umbrella of German land-based bombers, the British fleet will not dare to touch them. But the psychology of the German command is collapsing. Admiral Lütjens is a man consumed by fatalism. He is exhausted, likely suffering from the immense stress of the breakout and the battle. He makes a catastrophic assumption. He believes that the British radar is far more advanced than it actually is. He assumes that the British are still tracking him, that the silence from the pursuers is merely a tactical pause. He believes he is still in the net, even though he has already swum out of it. This belief leads to the error that loses the ship. On the morning of May 25th, thinking he is already detected, Lütjens decides there is no point in maintaining radio silence. He composes a long, detailed message to the High Command in Berlin. He reports the sinking of the Hood. He reports the damage to his own ship. He details the effectiveness of the British radar. He outlines his plan to reach France. The transmission lasts for nearly 30 minutes. It is a gift of unimaginable value to the enemy. The radio waves radiate outward from the Bismarck, bouncing off the ionosphere, reaching the listening stations in Britain. The British Y service, the intelligence operators listening for German signals, triangulate the source. They get a fix. But the fog of war is thick. The raw data from the triangulation is plotted incorrectly on the charts of the King George V. The navigational error confirms Tovey's false belief that the Bismarck is heading north. For several more hours, the British fleet continues to steam away from the target. It is not until the afternoon of May 25th that the error is discovered. The Admiralty in London recalculates the fix. They realize the truth. The Bismarck is not heading to Norway. She is heading southeast toward the Bay of Biscay. She is making a run for France. The realization is sickening. The British capital ships are now far behind the German battleship. The geometry of the chase has shifted in favor of the Bismarck. She has a lead of nearly 100 miles. At her current speed, even damaged, she will reach the protection of the German Air Force by the morning of May 27th. The Royal Navy has run out of time. The battleships King George V and Rodney are too far away to catch her. The only force that stands between the Bismarck and safety is Force H, steaming north from Gibraltar. This force contains the aircraft carrier Ark Royal. But Ark Royal is not a battleship. She cannot stand and fight the Bismarck. Her only weapon is a squadron of obsolete biplanes, the ferry Swordfish. The entire outcome of the hunt now rests on the ability of canvas-winged airplanes to slow down a steel fortress. As May 26 dawns, the ocean is rough and the sky is low. The Bismarck is still technically lost. The direction-finding fix was an area, not a point. The British know roughly where she is, but they need eyes on the target. The search falls to the Coastal Command. Long-range Catalina flying boats are dispatched from Northern Ireland. They fly low over the gray waves, their crews scanning the infinite monotony of the Atlantic. At 10:30 a.m., Ensign Leonard Smith, an American pilot flying with the Royal Air Force as a co-pilot advisor, since the U.S. is not yet officially in the war, looks out of his blister window. He sees a ship. It is alone. It is massive, and it is leaving a telltale trail of oil on the water. The Bismarck has been found. The location is critical. She is 690 miles northwest of Brest, France. She is dangerously close to safety. The mathematics are brutal. The Bismarck will enter the range of German air cover in less than 24 hours. The Ark Royal launches her planes, but the weather is atrocious. The carrier's deck is pitching and rolling in the heavy swell, rising and falling 50 feet. It is a testament to the skill of the pilots that they can launch at all. The first strike is a disaster. The Swordfish pilots, flying through rain and cloud, spot a ship on their radar. They dive. They release their torpedoes. But it is not the Bismarck, it is the HMS Sheffield, a British cruiser that had been detached to shadow the enemy. It is a moment that could have turned tragedy into farce. The British are attacking their own ship. Fortunately, the Sheffield's captain recognizes the friendly planes and takes evasive action. More importantly, the torpedoes are fitted with a new type of magnetic detonator. The detonators are faulty. Many of the torpedoes explode prematurely upon hitting the water. The Sheffield survives unscathed. The pilots return to the Ark Royal, shaken and humiliated. They have wasted a strike, they have wasted time, the sun is setting, they have one chance left. The armorers on the Ark Royal work frantically to rearm the Swordfish. This time, they replace the magnetic detonators with simple contact fuses. They set the depth settings. They refuel the planes. At 7:15 p.m., 15 Swordfish take off. The weather has worsened. The wind is gale force. The rain is horizontal. These are open cockpit biplanes, flying at 80 knots into a storm that would ground modern jets. They are flying against the most heavily armored anti-aircraft platform in the Atlantic. On the Bismarck, the crew is exhausted. They have been at battle stations for days. They have not slept. They are running on adrenaline and fear. They know they are close to France. They can almost smell the land. They believe they have survived the gauntlet. Then, the lookouts hear the drone of engines. The Swordfish attack is surreal. They fly so slowly that the Bismarck's sophisticated anti-aircraft fire control systems cannot track them. The German guns are calibrated for modern, fast monoplanes. The Swordfish are flying below the minimum speed settings of the German predictors. The shells burst well ahead of the biplanes. The Bismarck's flak turns the sky into a wall of fire. Tracers arc through the gloom. The sea erupts with shrapnel. But the Swordfish keep coming, low over the waves, dropping their torpedoes at point-blank range. Most of the torpedoes miss or strike the thick armor belt, detonating harmlessly against the hardened steel. But one torpedo runs true. It does not hit the engine room. It does not hit the magazine. It heads for the stern. At 8:47 p.m., the torpedo strikes the Bismarck's Acate's heel. It impacts the steering gear compartment. The explosion is not massive enough to sink the ship, but the location is fatal. The blast jams the twin rudders at a 12-degree angle to port. The steering machinery is wrecked. The compartment floods, cutting off access for repairs. On the bridge, Captain Lindemann orders a course correction. The ship does not respond. She begins to turn in a slow, wide circle. They try to steer with the engines, running the starboard screws at full power and the port screws in reverse. It doesn't work. The force of the jammed rudders is too great. The wind pushes the bow around. The Bismarck, the most powerful battleship in the world, is trapped in a loop. She is turning uncontrollably into the wind. She is turning north. She is turning back toward the enemy. The realization of the damage spreads through the German command like a virus. Divers are sent down into the flooded steering room, but the water is surging violently, tossing them around like dolls. It is impossible to unjam the rudders. They consider blowing the rudders off with explosives, but fear the damage to the screws would leave them dead in the water anyway. Admiral Lütjens sends a final, despairing signal to Berlin. "Ship unmaneuverable, we will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." It is a message of resignation. The chase is over. The Bismarck cannot run, she can only wait. In the darkness, the British destroyers are closing in. They are the pack of wolves coming to harry the wounded bear. The battleships, King George V and Rodney, are steaming down from the north, guided by the beacon of the circling cruiser. The ocean, which for days had been a vast, empty expanse offering the hope of escape, has now shrunk to a killing box. The silence of the empty ocean is broken by the sound of the Bismarck's own alarm bells. The anachronism of the biplane has defeated the modernity of the battleship. The executioners are gathering, and there will be no dawn for the German ship, only a final, burning light. The North Atlantic night does not fall gently. It collapses like a heavy curtain, bringing with it a darkness so absolute that the horizon vanishes. On the evening of May 26, 1941, the German battleship Bismarck is no longer a predator stalking the convoys of the Empire. She is a crippled beast trapped in a meteorological and tactical cage from which there is no escape. The single torpedo from the Swordfish biplane, a weapon designed in the 1920s, flying at speeds slower than a modern car on a highway, has achieved what the combined might of the Royal Navy's capital ships could not. It has jammed the Bismarck's twin rudders 12 degrees to port. The hydrodynamics are unforgiving. The massive ship, displacing 50,000 tons, is caught in a forced turn. No matter how the engineers vary the speed of the three propellers, the Bismarck insists on turning into the wind. She is turning northwest. She is turning directly toward the enemy she has spent 6 days trying to evade. Inside the steering gear compartment, deep in the stern of the ship, the scene is one of desperate claustrophobic horror. The torpedo hit did not breach the main armored citadel, but it tore open the stern compartments. The steering room is flooded. The water is surging violently with the heave of the ship, a cold, oily slurry filled with jagged metal debris. Captain Lindemann calls for divers. These men, wearing heavy rubber suits and breathing apparatus, attempt to enter the flooded compartment. Their mission is to uncouple the rudders from the jammed steering motors, allowing the ship to be steered by her engines alone. But the ocean fights them. The surge of the water in the confined space acts like a hydraulic press, tossing the divers against the bulkheads. The hatches are twisted, the machinery is mangled. After repeated, terrifying attempts, the damage control officer reports to the bridge. The rudders are immovable. A proposal is made to blow the rudders off with explosives. It is a radical, suicidal idea. If the explosion damages the propellers, which are located just feet away, the Bismarck will be dead in the water, a stationary target. Admiral Lütjens rejects the plan. He knows the end is coming. He chooses to keep the ship moving, even if she is moving in the wrong direction. On the bridge, the mood shifts from the frenetic energy of combat to a cold, nihilistic fatalism. Lütjens, a man who has seemed detached and gloomy throughout the voyage, now seems to embrace the inevitable. He sends a radio message to the High Command in Berlin. It is not a request for help. He knows the U-boats are too far away and the Luftwaffe cannot reach him. It is a testament. Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer. To the crew, this message is a death sentence. The officers begin to distribute the ship's supply of alcohol and cigarettes. The rigid discipline of the Kriegsmarine holds, but the illusion of survival is gone. In the mess halls, men write letters that they know will never be mailed. They shave and put on clean uniforms, preparing their bodies for the water. But the Royal Navy is not content to wait for dawn. The long hunt has exhausted the British crews as well, but they sense blood. Admiral Tovey, aboard the flagship King George V, is wrestling with his own crisis: fuel. His battleships have been steaming at high speed for days. Their tanks are running dry. If he does not catch the Bismarck by the morning of May 27th, he will be forced to break off and return to port, leaving the German raider to potentially drift toward air cover. He needs to pin the Bismarck down. He needs to keep her occupied, awake, and bleeding throughout the night. He unleashes the wolves. The 4th Destroyer Flotilla, commanded by Captain Philip Vian aboard HMS Cossack, is ordered to intercept. Vian is a legendary destroyer captain, aggressive and fearless. His force consists of 5 ships: Cossack, Sikh, Maori, Zulu, and the Polish destroyer Piorin. These are small ships, unarmored tin cans compared to the Bismarck. In a daylight battle, a single 15-inch shell from the battleship would vaporize a destroyer. But in the pitch black of a stormy Atlantic night, the equation changes. The destroyers are fast, agile, and hard to see. The weather is atrocious. A force 8 gale is blowing. The waves are 40 feet high, mountains of water that crash over the bridges of the destroyers. The British and Polish ships are rolling 40 degrees, their crews vomiting from seasickness, holding onto stanchions to keep from being thrown across the deck. At 10:38 p.m., the Piorin spots the Bismarck. The engagement that follows is one of the most surreal of the naval war. The Piorin is a small destroyer manned by Polish sailors who have lost their country to the German invasion. Their hatred for the enemy is personal and absolute. When they sight the battleship, the Polish captain, Commander Eugeniusz Pławski, orders a signal to be flashed by searchlight at the German giant. "I am a Pole." Then he opens fire. The Pioran charges the Bismarck, firing her small 4.7-inch guns. It is a terrier attacking a bear. The Bismarck responds. Her massive turrets rotate. The 15-inch guns roar in the darkness, the muzzle flashes illuminating the rain-swept ocean like lightning. The German radar, damaged by the concussion of her own guns in the Denmark Strait and the vibration of the chase, is unreliable. The optical rangefinders are hampered by the rain and the dark. The Bismarck is firing blindly at the shadows dancing in the waves. The destroyers attack in waves. They dash in, launch torpedoes, and turn away under smoke screens. The Cossack, Maori, and Zulu all make runs. They fire star shells, magnesium flares that drift down on parachutes, bathing the Bismarck in a stark, ghostly white light. For the German crew, the night is a psychological torture. They cannot sleep. They cannot rest. The alarm bells ring constantly. The ship lurches unpredictably, unable to steer into the waves, rolling heavily in the trough. Every time a star shell bursts overhead, they feel naked, exposed to the eyes of the enemy. The sound of the secondary armament, the 5.9-inch guns, firing at the destroyers is a constant, hammering rhythm that rattles the teeth. No torpedoes from the destroyers hit the Bismarck that night, or if they do, they strike the armor belt and fail to detonate. But the damage is done. The harassment keeps the German gun crews at their stations for another 12 hours. Fatigue is a poison. It slows reflexes, it clouds judgment. By the time the sun begins to rise on May 27th, the crew of the Bismarck has been at battle stations for nearly 4 days straight. They are zombies manning a dying ship. As the gray light of dawn begins to bleed into the sky, the weather does not break. The wind is still howling from the northwest. The visibility is poor, patches of rain scudding across the water. Admiral Tovey, aboard King George V, makes his final dispositions. He is joined by the battleship HMS Rodney. The Rodney is an older ship, slow and ugly, known as the Cherry Trees, because she carries 16-inch guns in 3 triple turrets all mounted forward of the bridge. She is a sledgehammer. She lacks the speed of the Bismarck, but she packs a punch heavier than anything else in the British fleet. The heavy cruiser Norfolk, which has shadowed the Bismarck since the Denmark Strait and the Dorsetshire joined the formation, the stage is set for the execution. The Bismarck is stumbling at 7 knots. She is wallowing in the heavy seas, her crew is exhausted, her captain has gone silent. Her admiral is resigned to death, but her guns are still loaded, her armor is still intact. She is still a dangerous animal. At 8:43 a.m., the lookouts on the King George V spot the target. The Bismarck is hull up on the horizon, a dark smudge against the rain. She is 12 miles away. The British ships maneuver to close the range. Tovey wants to be certain. He does not want a long-range duel. He wants to get close enough that he cannot miss. The British ships approach from the west, silhouetted against the lighter horizon, while the Bismarck is obscured by the darker eastern sky. It is the reverse of the tactical situation at the Denmark Strait. But this time, the Bismarck cannot maneuver to unmask her aft turrets. She cannot choose the range. She can only drift and take the blow. At 8:47 a.m., the HMS Rodney opens fire. Her 16-inch guns erupt. A minute later, the King George V joins in with her 14-inch battery. The sound rolls across the water, a thunderclap that signals the end of the chase. On the Bismarck, the gunnery officer tries to return fire. The forward turrets, Anton and Bruno, rotate. They fire a salvo at the Rodney. The shells land close, straddling the British ship. For a brief, terrifying moment, it seems the Bismarck might still have teeth. Her aim is true. But the anachronism has already done its work. Because the Bismarck cannot steer, she is rolling unpredictably in the trough of the waves. This throws off her fire control solution. Her next salvo goes wide, and then the British shells arrive. The third salvo from the Rodney finds the mark. A 16-inch shell strikes the Bismarck's forward superstructure. It does not hit the armor belt. It hits the soft upper works. It smashes into the forward command post. The explosion kills hundreds of men instantly. It destroys the central fire control director. In 1 second, the Bismarck is blinded. The sophisticated optical eyes, the pride of Zeiss, are shattered glass and twisted metal. Admiral Lütjens and his staff are likely killed in this impact. With the central direction gone, the individual turrets are forced to fire under local control. They are fighting their own private wars, aiming visually through their own periscopes. But without the coordination of the central computer, their fire becomes ragged and inaccurate. The Bismarck has been decapitated. The British ships close in. The range drops to 10,000 yards, then 8,000, then 6,000. This is point-blank range for battleships. The Rodney fires a broadside that hits the Bismarck's forward turrets. Turret Anton is permanently disabled. Turret Bruno is blown open, its guns left pointing at the sky in a frozen salute. The King George V's shells tear into the superstructure. The funnel is riddled with holes, the mainmast collapses, fires break out across the deck. The ship is being hammered into scrap metal while her crew is still alive inside her. The night of the Wolves was a battle of harassment. The morning is a battle of annihilation. The Bismarck is no longer a ship, she is a target barge. She does not strike her colors, her flag still flies. But she has ceased to be a combatant. The British admirals are puzzled. They are pounding the ship with the heaviest ordnance in existence, yet she does not sink. The 12-inch armor belt, the pride of German engineering, is holding the waterline. The superstructure is a ruin. The guns are silent, the interior is an inferno, but the citadel floats. Admiral Tovey checks his fuel gauges. He is critically low. He cannot stay much longer. He orders his ships to close even further. "Get closer," he signals. "We must finish her." The Rodney moves to within 3,000 yards. She is firing her massive guns flat like pistols. The shells are smashing through the Bismarck's hull, entering one side and blowing out the other. Inside the Bismarck, the survivors are living in a world of noise, heat, and darkness. The orders to abandon ship are given, but there is no way to get the boats into the water. The decks are a shambles of twisted steel. The men gather in the lower compartments, waiting for the end. The anachronism of the Swordfish torpedo has led to this, a modern battleship, the pinnacle of naval technology, reduced to a helpless, burning wreck, surrounded by enemies who are systematically taking her apart. The hunt that began with a secret sortie in the Baltic is ending in a public execution in the Atlantic. The night is over, the day of judgment has arrived, and the Bismarck, silent and burning, waits for the final blow. By 10:01 a.m. on May 27, 1941, the Battle of the Atlantic has devolved from a strategic contest of naval power into a gruesome spectacle of industrial demolition. The German battleship Bismarck, once the terrifying ghost of the shipping lanes, has been reduced to a floating scrap heap. She is surrounded by the British home fleet. The battleships King George V and Rodney are pouring fire into her at ranges so short that the British gunners can see the individual rivets on the enemy hull through their optical sights. The Bismarck has ceased to be a fighting unit. Her main turrets are silent, their barrels drooping at odd angles or blown entirely off their mountings. Her superstructure is a tangled forest of shredded steel. Fires are raging out of control in the midships, fed by ruptured fuel lines and the ready-use ammunition for the anti-aircraft guns. Smoke, thick and black, billows from the wreck, mixing with the gray rain of the squall. Yet she refuses to sink. Admiral John Tovey, watching from the bridge of the King George V, is witnessing the terrifying resilience of German naval engineering. The Bismarck's armored citadel, the central box of hardened steel that protects the magazines and the engines, is holding. The British shells are smashing the upper works, killing the crew, and destroying the communications, but they are not penetrating the vitals of the ship below the waterline. The Rodney has fired more than 300 16-inch shells. The King George V has emptied her lockers. They are hammering a corpse that will not lie down. This durability creates a desperate problem for the British. Their fuel bunkers are critically low. They cannot stay in the area much longer. Every minute they linger makes them vulnerable to German U-boats or Luftwaffe bombers, which are surely racing toward the scene. Tovey faces the grim possibility that he might have to turn for home, leaving the Bismarck afloat, a drifting hulk that could potentially be salvaged by German tugs. "I cannot get her to sink with gunfire," Tovey remarks to his staff. It is a statement of frustration bordering on disbelief. But deep inside the bowels of the Bismarck, a different decision has already been made. Commander Hans Oehls, the executive officer, takes command of the dying ship. He knows that surrender is impossible. The Bismarck's orders are to fight to the last shell, but the shells are gone or the guns are broken. The only remaining duty is to ensure the ship does not fall into enemy hands. OLs issues the order to scuttle. In the center engine room, Lieutenant Gerhard Junak receives the command. The interior of the engineering spaces is a world of heat and noise, but relatively intact compared to the slaughterhouse on the upper decks. The lights are flickering. The air is foul. Junak gathers his men. They prepare the explosive charges attached to the cooling water intakes. They open the sea valves. Prepare for scuttling, Junak orders. Light the fuses. The charges detonate with dull thumps, barely audible over the crashing of the British shells above. The ocean begins to rush into the turbine rooms. The pumps are shut down. The Bismarck begins to settle by the stern. On the surface, Admiral Tovey decides he can do no more. He signals the fleet. Any ship with torpedoes remaining, close and finish her. He turns the King George V and the Rodney north, heading for Scapa Flow. They are running on fumes. The executioner's role falls to the heavy cruiser HMS Dorsetshire. The Dorsetshire moves in. The Bismarck is a silent, burning wall of steel. She is listing heavily to port. Her flag is still flying from the mainmast, a tattered swastika visible through the smoke. The cruiser approaches to within 3,000 yards, point-blank range for a torpedo. At 10:25 a.m., the Dorsetshire fires 2 torpedoes into the Bismarck's starboard side. They hit. Columns of water erupt against the armor belt. The cruiser circles around to the port side. She fires another torpedo. It strikes the hull. The combined effect of the scuttling charges and the torpedo hits breaks the stalemate of buoyancy. The Bismarck rolls slowly to port. The funnel touches the water. The superstructure plows into the waves. As she capsizes, the immense weight of the turrets causes them to fall out of their barbettes, dropping into the abyss. At 10:39 a.m., the stern disappears. The bow rises into the air for a brief, agonizing moment, then slides beneath the surface. The Bismarck is gone. The ocean boils where the ship went down. Debris shoots to the surface, wood, cork, oil, and bodies. The silence that follows the sinking is shocking. For hours, the air has been filled with the roar of 16-inch guns. Now, there is only the sound of the wind and the waves. In the water, hundreds of men are swimming. They are covered in heavy bunker oil, which blinds them and clogs their throats. They are clinging to rafts, to pieces of timber, to each other. Of the more than 2,200 men who sailed from Gotenhafen, perhaps 800 have made it off the ship alive. The Dorsetshire and the destroyer Maori move into the debris field. They lower ropes and scramble nets. The British sailors, who just minutes ago were trying to kill these men, are now leaning over the rails, hauling them up. It is the strange chivalry of the sea. The enemy is no longer the German sailor. The enemy is the Atlantic Ocean. The rescue is chaotic. The swell is heavy. The German sailors are exhausted, too weak to hold onto the ropes. British sailors climb down the nets to grab them. One by one, the survivors are pulled onto the deck of the Dorsetshire. Then a lookout screams, "Periscope! Starboard beam!" The captain of the Dorsetshire has a split-second decision to make. He is stationary in submarine-infested waters. If a U-boat is there, his ship is a sitting duck. He has hundreds of his own men on board, plus the 80 he has just rescued. He orders the engines ahead. Full speed. The ropes are cut. The nets are pulled up. The Dorsetshire accelerates, her propellers churning the water. In the water behind her, hundreds of German sailors are left floating in the wake. They scream for help. They wave their arms, but the cruiser steams away. The logic of war is absolute. The safety of the ship outweighs the lives of the survivors. The U-boat alarm was likely false, or the U-boat was out of torpedoes. But the result is a tragedy within a tragedy. The Maori also departs. The U-74, which arrives later, finds only 3 men alive on a raft. A German weather ship picks up another 2. Out of a crew of over 2,200 men, only 114 survive. The news of the sinking flashes around the world. In London, the relief is palpable. Churchill announces the victory to the House of Commons. The Bismarck has been sunk. The cheers are raucous. The ghost of the Hood has been avenged. The lifeline to America is safe. In Berlin, the mood is funereal. Hitler, who had placed his faith in the Z-Plan and the surface raiders is devastated. He loses faith in the Kriegsmarine's heavy ships. He issues an order that effectively ends the era of the German surface raider. No capital ship is to sortie without his direct permission. The sister ship, Tirpitz, will spend the rest of the war hiding in Norwegian fjords, a fleet in being that threatens but never fights. The sinking of the Bismarck is the end of the battleship as the decisive weapon of naval warfare. The British victory was not achieved by a gunnery duel alone, it was achieved by a web of intelligence, radar tracking, and most critically, air power. It was the Swordfish, the slow, fragile biplanes that crippled the giant. The battleships Rodney and King George V merely acted as the firing squad. Naval strategists look at the engagement and see the future. A ship that cannot defend itself against air attack is doomed. A ship that relies on optical sighting is blind. The age of the dreadnought, which began in 1906, effectively ends on May 27, 1941. The wreck of the Bismarck falls 3 miles to the bottom of the Atlantic. She lands on the side of an underwater volcano sliding down the slope. Her hull is surprisingly intact. The guns are gone, but the swastika on the deck is still visible in the dark. She sits upright, a steel monument to a failed strategy. For the survivors, the war continues in prison camps in Canada and England. They are treated with a mix of curiosity and respect. They are the men who sank the Hood. They are the men who survived the inferno. But the legacy of the Bismarck goes beyond the men or the metal. It changed the way nations thought about the sea. It proved that no ship is unsinkable. It proved that technology, radar, aircraft, torpedoes, had outpaced the armor plate. As the British fleet returns to Scapa Flow, the crews are exhausted but triumphant. They have won the long hunt, but they also bring back a sobering realization. The war will not be won by a single decisive battle. It will be won by the grinding attrition of the convoys, by the technology of the radar sets, and by the relentless pressure of the blockade. The Bismarck was a magnificent anachronism. She was the ultimate expression of a type of warfare that was already dying when she was launched. She was a knight in plate armor riding onto a battlefield of machine guns. Her destruction was inevitable, not because she was flawed, but because the world had changed around her. Churchill's words ring true across the decades. The sinking of the Bismarck exercised a salutary influence upon the whole course of the war at sea. It freed the Royal Navy to focus on the U-boats. It secured the Atlantic Bridge, and it signaled to the world that the terror of the Nazi surface fleet had been broken. Today, the Bismarck rests in the deep 3 miles down. The currents flow through her shattered superstructure. The silence is absolute. But her story remains one of the great epics of the sea, a tale of hubris, courage, and the relentless march of technology that waits for no one, not even the Iron Chancellor. The story of the Bismarck is often told as a simple revenge drama, the tragic loss of the Hood followed by the righteous fury of the Royal Navy. But looking closer, we see a tragedy of obsolescence. The Bismarck was a masterpiece of engineering, perhaps the finest battleship ever built by Europe. She was crewed by brave men and commanded by competent officers. Yet, she was doomed before she ever left port because she was built for a war that no longer existed. The image of the Swordfish biplane, a canvas and wire antique crippling the steel giant, is the defining metaphor of the encounter. It reminds us that in war and in technology, it is not always the strongest or the newest that wins. It is the side that adapts. The British used an old weapon in a new way to defeat a new weapon fighting in an old way. There is also a profound sadness in the final moments of the ship. The decision to scuttle, the refusal to surrender, the hundreds of men left in the water as the Dorsetshire pulled away, these are the brutal realities of total war. The Bismarck was not a monster, she was a ship of war, and her crew were sailors doing their duty until the physics of their situation made duty impossible. As we leave the wreck in the darkness of the Atlantic Trench, we are reminded that the era of the battleship was brief, violent, and majestic. The Bismarck was its final, fiery exclamation point. If this journey into the most famous naval hunt in history meant something to you, we'd be honored to have you with us again. Until next time, stay curious and take good care.